And so I turned to the sister and I said, when Nolan made his transition, something really unusual happened to me in the hospital room. And I'm wondering if anything unusual happened to you. And she just looked at me. Her mouth kind of opens, her eyes get as big as saucers. And taking that as a yes, I turned the tape recorder back on and said, I tell you what, you tell me your story first, then I'll tell you my story, and we'll compare notes. This is what she said. She said, Scott, I remember it very well because I was bedside on the opposite side of the room as you. You were sitting on the windowsill next to Willie. Yep. And she said, what I experienced was when Nolan flatlined, Mary Fran came across the veil, scooped Nolan up out of his physical body. The two of them had this exquisite reunion in which I was able to participate. Then the two of them turned and came over to me, meaning the sister. They came over to me, lifted me up out of my physical body, and I went with them into the light where we had a chance to affirm our love and affection for each other. We had a chance to say goodbye. And then I came back to my physical body standing next to the bed. It was almost identical, word for word, that I had experienced. And so it's a rare story about validated shared death experience where we actually experience the same thing.
My guest today is Dr. Taylor, who had a shared death experience with his love and her son that sent him on a quest around the world to all of these ancient sites, but eventually led him back to himself, where he discovered a combination of binaural beats and meditation that allowed him to reconnect with his passed away loved ones again and again. And this is something that he is able to teach you how to do. But this is like a Ginsu knife commercial because there's more. He has also, for the last 30 years, studied near death experiences. And if you've been watching this channel, you know that this is one of my passions. And I am so excited to talk to him because you're going to get a front row seat to all of the intricacies of NDEs. So, Scott, welcome. I am so glad to have you here today.
Lori, this is a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this, and let's get going.
Let's get going. Okay, so thank you. Let's start with your shared death experience because this is the tipping point for your life change.
Thank you for asking. And it started in 1981. I was in love with Mary Frances and her son Nolan, and they had been out sailing, beautiful summer day in southern Minnesota. And on the way home from Lake Washington, they were involved in a horrific car accident. And Mary Fran was killed outright, and Nolan sustained a head injury. And it took him about 6 days to make his transition. The 6 days becomes important because um, both Mary Fran and Nolan were transported to the Mayo Health System in Rochester, Minnesota. So they got some of the best care in the whole world. But it also allowed that amount of time allowed for all of the relatives and friends to gather and hold vigil for Nolan. Mary Fran was one of nine. And so when people started to gather, there were a lot of them. I mean, it was brothers and sisters and boyfriends, girlfriends, spouses, uncles, aunts, grandparents, neighbors, and friends. And that's only on her side of the family. And then there's everybody on my side of the family. So there were a lot of people there. So many that Nolan's room was actually kind of small. And there was a bed and then all these monitors that were behind his head. And there was just room for not many people. So we divvied it up. And every 2 hours, two of us would go in and we would be with Nolan. And the nursing staff on the floor was really helpful. And one of the things they told us was that hearing is the last sense to go. And so when we went in to visit Nolan, and he was in a persistent coma, he never did awaken. Um, it was important that we speak to him because he could probably hear us, but he just couldn't react to what we said. So as it turns out, my shift was with Janie, who was Mary Fran's oldest sister. And the two of us had the 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. shift on the morning of the sixth day. And we went in and we had his favorite storybook, and we read him stories. And then we told him about his uncles who, at about midnight, had snuck out of the waiting room and gone to the lounge areas in the Mayo Hospital at St. Mary's Hospital, and they stole all the cushions off the couches. And they put them on the floor of the waiting room so that they could rest, because there was 40, 50 people who were in this waiting room, and some of them want to catch a little shut eye. So, the place looked like a padded waiting room. Anyway, so we told him about his uncles and aunts, and we told him about what people were doing and saying. And at about 4:45 in the morning, Janie looked at me and she went to the edge of the bed. And back when they had clipboards at the end of the bed, she picked up the notes and she was reading what was on there. And Janie was a trained emergency room nurse, so she could look at the clipboard and then she could look at all the monitors. And when our eyes connected again, she said, "Scott, it's time. We should say our goodbyes." So the two of us pulled up our chairs and we sat by Nolan's head, and we told him that we were so proud of him, that he has been fighting so hard to stay with us here in the physical world, and that we loved his tenacity. But if his mother should come, and remembering that Mary Fran died 6 days before, if his mother should come to pick him up and ask him to go with her, that would be the right thing to do, that he should go with his mother. And we told him that we loved him dearly and we would always remember him. And then it's 5 o'clock in the morning, and the next shift was coming in. We gathered up our stuff and we left and went out. Well, it was about 45 minutes later when the nurse on the floor came into this crowded waiting room, flipped on the lights, woke everybody up, and said, "He's decreasing rapidly. It's time for y'all to go in and say your last goodbyes." And so we all filed into this little hospital room. And as luck would have it, I was one of the very last people to get into this room. When I got in there, it's already 4 or 5 deep around the bed. I thought, well, that's just silly. So I wound up going over and sitting on the windowsill next to Willie. He was right there, and just waiting. And I'd never held vigil. I'd never seen anybody pass away. And it was very gentle. Really, all there was to do was to be in a quiet mode, and you're just watching the heart monitor, and it's just going down and down, and eventually it flatlines. And when Nolan flatlined, what I experienced was Mary Fran coming across the veil and scooping Nolan up out of his physical body. And the reunion between the mother and son was just exquisite. And it surprised me because I was able to participate in that. I felt what was going on between the two of them. But what surprised me even more, Lori, was that I well, that the two of them then turned to me, came over, embraced me, and then the three of us left and went to the light. And so we entered the light, and it was the most extraordinary experience. It was like being immersed in the love of the universe. It was like being connected to everything that was out there. It was a merging of us and everything that existed. It was just beyond description. But that really didn't make any difference to me, because what I really wanted to do, and what we were able to do, is that the three of us were able to affirm our love and connection for each other. We had a chance to say a proper goodbye, because the accident, I was at work when the accident happened, so it was, you know, far apart. So we had a chance to say our goodbyes, and then we had a chance just to be together. And we were like that for a while. And at some point, it just felt complete. Not like I'm got to go now kind of complete. It was more like we have done what we need to do now, and everybody's in a good place. And then the two of them turned and they went into the light, and I came back to my physical body, sitting on the windowsill next to Willie. So that's the end of part A of my story. How are we doing so far?
We're doing great. Can I ask you a couple questions right here?
Let's do it.
Okay. Can you describe what Mary Frances looked like?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So for this, I need to back up for just a second to say that near death experiencers, when they leave their physical body and go into the light, experience one of three lights. There's either like the white light at the end of the tunnel, there's the black light, which is entering into the source energy, and then there's clear light. And that was my experience. And so clear light is this experience where all of a sudden you begin to realize that everything is exuding the love of the universe. It has its own light. So, this microphone, this desk, my shirt, the computer I'm looking at, I mean, everything would be exuding its own light. So, as close as I can describe it, is that they were, it was energy beings who had this energetic signature. And there was no doubt in my mind who, that's Mary Fran, that's Nolan. And we exchanged communication in that state. So if you're asking me, did I see them? Like, was Mary Fran dressed in a white robe with wings and a halo? No, it wasn't like that. And it's why on most components of a near death experience, the very first one that's listed is ineffable,
Yes.
which is this great English word that means we really don't have a good English word for this. And so trying to describe how this energy being, it was not even differentiated as much as it was the personality of Mary Fran. And so
Scott, were you the
that's as
same?
good as I can get right now.
Were you the same as them? Did you ever glance at your body, your hands, your anything?
If I was smarter, I would have. But really, my whole attention was on the two of them, because it was such an extraordinary thing to know that they both had made their transition, and to be with them and to have the ability to communicate with them was, that's where my focus was.
And are you communicating telepathically? Or are you using words and hearing their voices?
Um, let's just say I am so glad it didn't happen in English, because
You
it
would have,
was
yeah.
it, English, words have boundaries on them and they kind of go in this linear fashion. And communicating telepathically isn't like that. It's like you get this thought and it contains all the nuances. So if somebody like Mary Fran would say, I love you, well, that includes all of our experiences that we were together, the pain of being of this moment, the loss of our future, the extraordinary events that will happen as a result of it, the how our families would embrace us and how the other guidance that I have and she have were here to witness this exchange. And so, I mean, that would have taken a book to write out. But in one moment, there's this thought ball that arrives and it contains all of that.
Wow, I am so glad you explained that. I mean, it was such a beautiful way to explain it. And I think that when people hear telepathically, all they're thinking is whatever words I would have said out loud are just communicated in the head. And it's so much more than that. Thank you. So that was really fantastic. Okay, I want you to go ahead and finish telling your story.
Okay, part B of this story
Okay.
is that I'm so back up just a step. So I'm in the clear light with Mary Fran and Nolan. We've said our goodbyes, and now I'm coming back into my physical body. And I can explain it like this. So 100% of my physical consciousness is with Mary Fran and Nolan and our exchange together. And 100% of my consciousness is in the room with the other relatives and Willie sitting right next to me. It wasn't like my consciousness was split. That's when like 50-50. That isn't the way it felt. It felt like I was literally in two places at once that could be experienced fully, no diminishment of senses at all. So I didn't have a word to describe it then. Now I call it bilocation, where I was able to be in those two places at once. And Lori, I know that to be true because I'm sitting there on this windowsill and my physical body is filled with this loving light of the universe. And it feels like it's just trying to burst out of me. And as a result, my face had this expression of ecstasy and love and adoration. And if anybody had looked at me, it would have been entirely inappropriate. So I did the only thing I could think of, and that was to cover my face with my hands so that I could, so no one would misunderstand. Because I was keenly aware the whole room is filled with people who are weeping and hugging each other and crying on each other's shoulders. And I can't have this joyous milieu around me. I just, and so I stayed that way until that other part of me came back. We reunited, and I could then regain my sense of composure. And then I was able to participate and get and receive hugs from everybody in the room and grieve for the loss of Mary Fran and the loss of Nolan. Yeah, so that's part B. How
So
we
did
doing?
that great. So did that experience, I mean, I understand. We lose somebody in the physical. There's no replacement for that. Our cells literally miss the cells of the connection with the other person. That's science. But at the same time, you've been given this profound gift, the ability to see these loved ones and know beyond any faith by experience that they are not gone and that they are happy and whole and that they love you, and that can never be taken away from you. So did that truncate a little bit of the grieving process, or not really?
No, it didn't. It may have been different had I not had that experience. It just actually, I think it went on longer because I did have that experience. Because, okay, let me segue into part C because
You're going to answer it there.
I think this
Okay,
is appropriate.
perfect.
Um, so we need to flash forward about 15 years, and I'm now at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. St. Thomas is Minnesota's largest private university. I'm doing my doctoral work in educational leadership, and I'm writing my dissertation about people that have had near death experiences and how that affects who they are in the world and how they present themselves to the world because of their changed belief structure. But I'm having real trouble finding people to interview. And so, kind of out of desperation, I wrote all the women in Mary Fran's family to say, help, I need people. All of her family, the women anyway, wound up in healthcare professions of one sort or another. And so I thought they might have some ideas because I was going to hospices and care centers for the elderly. And what I was running up against was HIPAA. They couldn't help me. And rightfully so. I get it. Um, so anyway, I had to find people to interview a different way. And so one of Mary Fran's sisters, who asked to be anonymous, so I'm just going to call her the sister, wrote to me back and said, hey, about 10 years later, I had a near death experience. Do you want me to, can we interview? Can we talk about that? So great. So I go and I interview her. And at the end of the interview, I'm packing up all my gear. So I've got the tape recorders and they've got my notes and all that stuff. I'm packing it up, and this thought enters my head. And so I turned to the sister and I said, when Nolan made his transition, something really unusual happened to me in the hospital room. And I'm wondering if anything unusual happened to you. And she just looked at me. Her mouth kind of opens, her eyes get as big as saucers. And taking that as a yes, I turned the tape recorder back on and said, I tell you what, you tell me your story first, then I'll tell you my story and we'll compare notes. This is what she said. She said, Scott, I remember it very well because I was bedside on the opposite side of the room as you. You were sitting on the windowsill next to Willie. Yep. And she said, what I experienced was when Nolan flatlined, Mary Fran came across the veil, scooped Nolan up out of his physical body. The two of them had this exquisite reunion in which I was able to participate. Then the two of them turned and came over to me, meaning the sister. They came over to me, lifted me up out of my physical body, and I went with them into the light where we had a chance to affirm our love and affection for each other. We had a chance to say goodbye. And then I came back to my physical body standing next to the bed. It was almost identical, word for word, that I had experienced. And in an instant, any doubts that I had about what had happened to me, and there were many, because you just wonder. I mean, it was so outside my Presbyterian upbringing that I didn't have a place to put it. And here, somebody else had an identical experience to me. And the lovely thing is that I provided the same thing for her, which was
Except you were a complete copycat of her story. So she's like, is he putting me on?
no, she said, thank you, because that validates what I have been thinking. And so the two of us
Amazing. I got goosebumps
validated.
when you told that story, by the way. That's
Hmm,
amazing.
it is. And so it's a rare uh, story about validated shared death experience where we actually experience the same thing, only I don't know how that works. Is it at the same time or isn't it? Or is it two different dimensions? I don't know. I,
Which is because you would almost think, based on what we understand from a human perspective of time, that if you were there and she was there at the same time, you would have seen each other, but yet you didn't. You had your own individual because again, it makes sense that everybody was bilocated or maybe they were trilocated.
yeah, it was. We each got to have the experience that we needed, and then we wound up having a chance to communicate, and it allowed me to really move forward with my research into near death and shared death experiences. It allowed me to speak with more confidence. It allowed me to move from that place of belief into a known, even though it had happened to me and I trusted myself. There's always that, like, really? Was that grief talking? Was it that my creative imagination? Didn't feel like it, but could it? All gone. And so it helped validate other kinds of experiences that happen in these expanded states of awareness that I could now take as being real. And it expanded my sense of who we are as multidimensional beings existing on many planes of existence all at once. So, yeah, it was quite the experience. Did I answer your question?
You
It was a
did.
long time
It,
ago.
it it's absolutely incredible. Okay, so I know that when this happened, you also began a journey around the world searching. So will you explain what happened to you and where you went and what you found?
Sure. So, when I came back, I didn't have a place to put this experience. It just, it was so outside of how I was brought up in a mainline Presbyterian church and how spirituality had been framed for me that it just kind of hung out there as this experience. However, I knew that I wanted to go back and reconnect again with Mary, Fran, and Nolan. And I knew without a shadow of a doubt that if I had done it once, I could do it again. And I just had to figure out how.
It's the 4-minute mile.
Yeah, right. So, okay. So the only thing I could think of was to go to the ancient sacred sites around the world because they were clearly built there for some reason. And maybe there's some leftover juju in those spots that would propel me back into that space again. And so I went to Stonehenge. I went to the Oracle of Delphi. I went to the Sphinx and the Great Pyramids. I went to Machu Picchu and oh yeah, the temples up and down the Nile. And essentially what happened was that I got great vacations. And, and the whole spiritual advancement thing, like crickets. Yeah, there were some interesting experiences that were there. So okay, that didn't work. So I figured I had to do something more experiential. And so I studied with shamans in both North and South America. That was interesting. And I started up a meditative practice. I started up with TM and
Which is transcendental meditation for those of people who aren't familiar, correct?
right, based out
Okay.
of Fairfield, Iowa. And that got me part of the way there. I was like, oh, I can see glimmers from this. And then somebody introduced me to the Monroe Institute here in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where they use a special form of meditation assisted by binaural beat technology that helps you enter into expanded states of awareness and then hold them. And so I tried that out, and that did the trick for me.
Okay. I am obsessed with binaural beats. I learned about them a long time ago, and I had Dr. Evan Alexander on my show, who is a neurosurgeon, fascinated brain expert, right? And he's very
Yep.
much involved with a company called Sacred Acoustics. And I know that this is a key for me to do what you're talking about because I have all these synchronistic experiences. I've been on the other side through my experiences. And I, like you, have known for a long time there's a secret code, a secret key somewhere to help me do exactly what you've done. So I feel like you are part of my breadcrumb getting me to where I need to go. And I take the whole summer off. I don't do any interviews over the summer. And I go to my little cabin in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in the middle of nowhere. And I know that I'm supposed to work on this summer. So, first of all, will you explain what binaural beats are? Because it's using different frequencies within, I think, 5 decibels
So
of each other.
the easy way to explain it is that pause. This is a very old technology. It was rediscovered back in the 1880s. So, and what they discovered back then was if you were wearing headphones and you put 100 hertz in one ear and 104 hertz in the other ear, the brain tries to equalize those two tones because that's our natural neurological pathway for echolocation. So that's how you just determine where things are in space by the differential in tones. Well, you've got headphones on, so it cannot equalize those two tones. So what the brain does is it sets up a third tone that it can only hear itself, and that's the differential between the two. So if I was to give you 104 hertz and you were wearing headphones and that's all I put in there, Lori, I would just put you dead asleep because the differential 4 is the frequency of deep sleep. And
Hmm.
so what the brain does is it sets up 4, starts to hear 4, both hemispheres of the brain start to vibrate at that 4, and it does what it naturally does when it is experiencing 4, which is just knock you out. So it was Bob Monroe who discovered he was looking for a way to help people to learn to do out of body experiences, and he had to put them in a deep meditative state. But you can't, yes, you do the 4, but people are asleep. So his breakthrough was to say, what happens if we layer these? And you not only put in 104, but you also add one where the incremental is 12, which is where we are right now, this bright, awake, clear. And so now you're listening to two tones, one of which relaxes the body, puts it to sleep, and another one where you are bright, awake, and clear. And that's the launching pad for all the explorations into the non physical universe. That state of deeply relaxed body. So all those signals kind of just disappear, and we can put our focus into an expanded state of awareness. And then from there, Bob did all of his adventures, and all of his books are based out of that particular state. But later, he really started doing lots of different mixes, and he discovered all different kinds of locations in the non-physical universe based on different frequency patterns, and the rest is history. So
So did
it
you just study this or did you just pick this up and begin using it? So are you talking about like 1996 when all this happened or is this later?
no, this started in the late 70s, and he
I mean
started
for you, I
writing
mean for
about his
you, I mean for
experience.
you, I mean for you.
For me,
Yeah.
I found it in 1983.
Oh.
And by 1985, I had attended a series of the classes that Bob taught, and I became a trainer for them in 85 and did it for the next 35 years. And
Holy
then,
cow, I didn't know all this about you. This is amazing.
and then they asked me to be the executive director, president of the institution for 2 years, which was lovely because I came on just before the pandemic, which is
You.
really tough when you're running a residential retreat center and the state of Virginia goes, I'm sorry, there's no such thing as gathering.
Oh my goodness.
So it was a an interesting time as they
Okay, I want to ask a couple questions about the technology itself. From what I understand, you have to be very precise with what you're using. So, the people that are listening, I don't think you can just go on YouTube. You can't go on iTunes with your iPhone to get these because those frequencies get, what's the word I'm looking for? Compacted, compressed, right? They get compressed and they don't fully then do what you're talking about doing. So you have to be very specific with what you're using to achieve these states. Am I correct?
I like very much the frequencies that are put out by the Monroe Institute
Okay.
and by Hemisync and by
Okay.
Sacred Acoustics. They all
Okay.
come out of that same um, technological and theoretical framework. And I know they work. I've been teaching people how to use them forever and ever. So I would trust those. And you can go on, like there's an app that Monroe has. It's called Expand.
Okay.
And there's a bunch of free ones on there. You can check it out. If you like if you do,
And
then
any kind of
pay a
headset.
little bit of money and get some of the longer exercises.
Do you need a specific headset? Can you use any headset? Does it
Long as
matter?
long as it's stereo, you're good.
Okay. And noise canceling, non-noise canceling, does that matter?
Nope. I use noise canceling. It's a Bose, just
Okay.
because that they happen to fit me. It doesn't
Okay.
make any. It might clip a little bit, but
But
I've
even if
never
we had
seen.
the inexpensive little headsets that are $5, they would still work?
They'd still work. Yeah.
Okay.
So the first 10 years that we did this work, and we were training people, we'd fill up a hotel ballroom and put people on sleeping bags with their pillows, and then we had two big speakers at the front of the room. So
Wow.
don't even need headphones, just need stereo speakers. And it worked
Okay.
great. It worked great.
Alright,
So
so give me an example of an experience.
oops, I happen to like headphones just
Okay.
because the music and the sound is a little more intimate. And if a dog barks or a truck goes by, it's like you can more easily dismiss it wearing headphones than
Sure.
using stereo speakers. But that's the only reason. You don't have to have headphones.
Okay, so explain what kind of experiences you had because you reconnected.
Okay. So Monroe teaches the entry level class is called Gateway, and it's a fabulous class, and it always works. I taught it for 35 years, and 100% of the time, I worked on 100% of the people. It always works. And so during Gateway, I had a chance to reconnect with Mary Fran, but it was kind of brief, and I knew the connection was there. Anyway, the second class I took is another one called Guidelines, which is all about establishing a relationship with guidance. And I figured, what the heck, Mary Fran could be one of my guides. So, and that wound up being true, that I had that chance to reconnect, and so we had a chance to get over the that initial, like, oh my god, I love you, I'm sorry, all of that real deep emotion, and which was really natural, but it was, and now we can let that go because we have this connection and we can be with each other anytime we want. So we can kind of let that go and establish a new relationship. Add to that, Nolan came in, and interestingly, so for since the accident, Mary Fran has been really present in my life sometimes, and then she's gone away sometimes for as long as 10 years. She just wasn't around, and then she'd come back in again, and then she would leave and come back in again. So it whatever she's doing on that end, or maybe I don't need that. I don't know what the deal is, but that was her pattern. Nolan, on the other hand, has never left. He is always around. He's like right there. And so most of my communication is with Nolan. And we have a particular place that we meet. Um, it's in an area that is called the park, and there's a specific bench that when I picture that bench, I go there in my mind, and Nolan shows up, and we have a conversation. And that conversation, let me just say it a different way. Nolan shows up age appropriate. So sometimes he shows up as 7, like the day he died. And sometimes he shows up as he's 51 years old now. And I've had experiences. The one I remember most was he's in his early 30s and he shows up, and we're sitting on the bench next to each other, and he's dressed in something, in a suit that looks like it's from the 1950s. So it's white shirt, dark, narrow, skinny black tie, dark suit. He's got a briefcase with him, which is kind of from that era. So, what I believe is that he is showing me another life that he is living. And in that life, he is something akin to a U.S. Marshal. And the reason that he's there with me is, well, he opens up his briefcase and he pulls out a handgun. And he's explaining to me that in the line of duty, he had to shoot someone and he killed them. And even though they're trained to do that kind of work, it still doesn't stop the feeling that you had when you take another person's life. And he was really ripped up about it inside. And he wanted to talk to his dad. And that was kind of the role I was playing in his life back at the time of the accident, that we were establishing that kind of a relationship. And so um, it was a conversation that could only happen between a father and son, where they completely bared their souls about what that means and how to look at it in a way that he could come to peace with what he had done. And so you get to have deep, meaningful conversations that quickly answer your question. But it's also, sometimes they're playful. There's just stories, or what'd you do up there in heaven today? What did you discover? So it's,
This is
anything.
fascinating to me because I would almost think, from a soul perspective, we have access to everything. So there's a part of me that has heard near death experiencers say, there's nothing I didn't know. Yet here's Nolan on the other side, maybe between lives or whatever he's doing. And he's coming to you, having your human experience for guidance and comfort. That just, I've never heard anybody tell a story quite like that before. This is fascinating. You've studied near death experiences for 30 years. We talked before this interview, you've probably studied more than double what I have. What in the world do you make of that?
Well, here's how, the way I think about it is that both of us were living physical lives, and both of us had the ability to be able to enter into an expanded state of awareness, and we could talk to each other. And we have a soul connection. So, it, am I his guide in that life? I don't know how that works, but clearly we are connected, and he is very much human. I mean, he's not dead. I'm not dead. We're just in this meditative state where, yes, near death experiencers have the ability to connect and have a unity experience, but that isn't what happens to meditators, and at least not all the time. But we have the ability to connect soul to soul beyond time and space. So that's how I'm viewing it. Like, we're both in the physical, and we both need advice like we would be in the physical.
It's
So
an interesting concept that you could be his soul guide, because why not? Everything's happening at once. Time
everything.
is only linear here in this earthly experience, and it's only, from at least my experience on the other side, I know only a fraction of my higher self is in this incarnation, and yours and everybody else's. So that's so completely conceivable. So let's talk about these near death experiences that both you and I have this fascination with. What is the biggest thing that you feel like you have learned through all of this study? What is the big takeaway in all this time that you've spent and invested in investigating these experiences?
um, it's just so simple. I mean, we, the physical universe and the non-physical universe is comes out of consciousness, the loving consciousness that is existence. And we are made up of that loving consciousness, as is everything. And as a result, because we are made up of that loving consciousness, we can never be separated from it. And this whole physical existence that we're going through right now, we agreed that we would put the filters on so that we would not recognize that we would have this sense of duality, which is just utter fiction. And it feels pretty real right now, but in the scope of things, it doesn't really exist. And that what we do here is learn what it means to be fully human, to be fully alive, to fully love. And so as a result, I think what our mission is here is to be authentic, is to be who we are and do what we need to do here in the physical in order for us to live out the assignment we gave ourselves when we came into the physical. So the big takeaway is that consciousness, loving consciousness, is the source of all things. It is irreducible. There is nothing underneath consciousness. Out of that springs quarks and molecules and all of this physical universe, but that is the source of all things.
Beautiful. So near death experiences run a gamut, and there's a lot of similarities between them. So you want to run through the characteristics of a near death experience?
I'm going to do two things at once. How about that?
I love it.
Because newer on the research scene is shared death experiences. And I think it's kind of interesting to compare the two.
Okay.
So, in a near death experience, mostly, please note the qualifier, there's some sort of physical trauma, so much so that the physical body dies and the non physical body leaves and it goes up and has an adventure. And typically, that adventure can include things like you meet your escort, you go down the tunnel, you have the reunion with dead relatives, you meet divine beings, you have a life review, and you get to go to the reception and regeneration center, that area that's called the park, that life between lives. And then at some point, after having done all that, some magic person here in the physical, an EMT, puts the paddles on and goes boom and reanimates the body again. Soul comes back, and now you're fully back in again. And so, in a rough way, that's a near death experience. Shared death experience is almost identical, except for there's no physical trauma. Like what happened to me, I'm sitting on a windowsill. There's nothing physically wrong with me. I'm just sitting there next to Willie. And Mary Fran comes over, and Nolan, they both come over, embrace me, and pick me up and take me to the light. And in a shared death experience, you get the choice. You can either observe it, kind of a step back and watch the two of them do their thing, or you can actually immerse yourself in their experience and you get to feel everything that they're feeling and you go through everything that they go through. So it's quite extraordinary that way. So I'm a little bit closer on that end because they're showing me or giving me the experience of what it's like to be in the love of the universe. So near death experiences, trauma, shared death, no trauma. The one or the second key difference is that in some near death experiences, people have what's known in the biz as a less than positive experience, an LTP. And so it takes all different kinds of forms, but mostly it's about your guides coming up and giving you a 2x4 alongside the head and saying, "Yo, Lori, you are screwing up. You came down here with this mission. You aren't living the mission. You aren't even close to living the mission. So we got to have a talk." That kind of complete with finger wag. So that's so sometimes that's interpreted as it can be a bad experience or less than positive or hellish or whatever. And a lot of times it's about getting your attention and getting you back on the path that you had signed up for. In a shared death experience, on the other hand, the research shows that 100% of the people who make their final transition go to and have a positive experience. No negatives. It's every single person. There's 900 people in the study. All 900 had a positive, blissful, welcoming, compassionate experience. So that less than positive experience seems to be built in because they know you're coming back. And it's important for your growth to have that, where it's absolutely not necessary on the other side. You are being welcomed back home, back into the love that you already are.
You saying that makes me immediately think about life reviews because one of the big reasons that I wanted to start interviewing people who had near death experiences is because of the impact of the knowledge life reviews have had on me and my life and how I live it. When you are keenly aware of your ripple effects and that what you are doing to others, you completely do to yourself, you do things much differently. So, will you share a little bit about your feeling, your thought, your experience, your
Yeah,
research along these?
I've talked to a bunch of people that have had life reviews,
Me too.
and what I think is fascinating is that when you have them, you trilocate. To be you relive your own life with all the feelings, all the emotions, all the thoughts. It's all right there. Now, remembering it happens outside of time, so it's like your whole life happens at once. But we're not going to go down that rabbit hole because that just bends your mind. But you get to have completely relive your whole life just the way you did it. And you get to relive that experience as the other person in the room. So if you're having a conversation like we are, right? So when I have my life review, I'm going to be me, and I'm also going to be you,
Yeah.
Lori. And
Yeah.
I get to understand what's going on in your head and what your motivations are and what you're thinking. And so I get to be me, I get to be you. And there's a third perspective, this omniscient perspective. This kind of overlooks the whole scene and says, as a result of the interview between Scott and Lori, this is going to affect Mary, Fred, Skip, and Tony, and they're going to tell their 8 friends, and you get to watch it, as you said, watch it ripple out into the community, so you can then really understand your actions. Now, here's the part that I didn't discover until about halfway through, which I had a guy tell me. He was at a checkout counter at a grocery store, and he had a particularly bad day, and he was running into this young girl. It was his first day on the job, and she couldn't get the cash register to work, and he blew up at her and made her cry, and it was just not a good scene. And when he was having his life review, he got to that point and, of course, learned that was her first day on the job. And Fred, the manager, hadn't completely trained her. He was going to do that. And then he got busy and he didn't. Anyway, so he got to find out her whole backstory. And so when we go through a life review, we typically have a divine being with us. And that divine being's job is to ask us one question, which is, what did you learn from that experience? And this guy, being clever, he says, okay, this is what I learned from yelling at that young girl. I'd like a do-over. And the divine being said, sure, let's do it over. So rewind the tape. He comes up and she's not making it work. And he says to her, is this your first day? Because it says trainee on her badge. And she says, yeah, it is. And when Fred told me he was going to teach me how to do this, this is not working. He says, don't worry. You know what? The most important thing is that you take care of your customer in the way you know how, and you can always fix the paperwork. So don't worry about it. This will be good. And he goes off and he finds Fred, brings him up, and then when they have a successful transaction, and off he goes. And then he compared the first ripple to the second ripple, and oh, what a difference in her life and in her family's life, and especially the boyfriend who caught it when she got off work. So what I learned from that, and subsequently I was able to ask about it, was this is like instant karma. So we have the ability to say, okay, what if I change that? What if I change this? And get this, both of those scenarios wind up being part of our human experience, which is what this is all about anyway. All of us are little bits of the collective human consciousness, and we are all adding to that consciousness every day with our experiences. And so we get to add in that life review, we get to add another bit that can be healing and can be maybe has a better turnout. Or not. You just don't know, because maybe it was your job to be a jerk right then, and that really helped her growth 12 years in the future. You get to see that too. So but I love this idea that we can have a do-over, and that you get to have divine assistance along the way to help us understand who we are, what we can be, and how we can live our life in a way that is true to our mission here on earth. So
I'm
that's
so glad that you explained that, because you gave me the perfect transition to a question that I knew I was going to ask you today, which is a very touchy subject for a lot of people. When this comes up, this is one of the most common things that I am asked about. What about all the bad things in the world? And I heard you talking about something, and it's the perfect segue to this, which is the roles that we play with one another. And you mentioned it in your story where you said maybe he was meant to play the jerk so that she could learn something from it. And you took a really big story in human history, which is the Bible, with the story of Jesus and with the betrayal that he received, right, from Judas. And you talked about how you would love to see him on the other side
It's
because you
true.
have a theory. So please share this theory because this is a bigger conversation. And I think that this has that one of the things, Scott, that I try and do on this show. This is about empowerment. And when people can change a perception that they have, it empowers them when they know something that they maybe didn't know before. And I think that this is the moment right here.
So it when we have a near death experience, or we're in that expanded state of awareness, we get to have a different viewpoint, a different outlook. We get to look back and go, oh, that is the tapestry of human events that's supposed to happen. So it occurred to me that, like, Jesus can't be Jesus unless there's Judas. He needed somebody to betray him in order for him to fulfill his mission on earth. So, who is that person? Who would sign up for that? And in my mind, Judas has to be Jesus's best friend, because there couldn't be anybody else who would sign up for that duty to be hated by all of mankind for 2,000 years unless it was for such a divine purpose as that. And so when I leave my physical body, that's one of the early stops, is to go visit Judas Iscariot and have a chit chat about how the two of them arranged that missions and why did he choose to play that role such that it could be so important for all of us, so many years later.
But this concept isn't just important for that story, it's important for everybody watching because all of us have had an incident. We've had an experience with another human being that hurt us, betrayed us, did some damage that we carry with us. And what if, when we're on the other side, we find out that person loved us so much that they raised their hand and said, I love you so much. I will do this because unless you have that, you will not be able to fulfill what you have come here to become and to do and experience.
Yep. So in that, in those few moments that I was with Mary Fran in the light, and she told me that she loved me, as that thought ball, as I've been able to unravel that thought ball, one of the messages that is in there is that the pain of the moment is beautiful. It's a magnificent thing because it helps all of us understand love in a way that transcends that blip in duality. It allows me to see, yes, the pain of loss of Mary, Fran, and Nolan, and to see the gift in that, that how my life has been completely changed as a result of wanting to go back and reconnect with the two of them and all the adventures that happened along the way, and expensive vacations to really weird places.
So do you
But
think you planned it? Do you think you planned the two of you
I'm
coming here planned that?
I'm positive that it was planned,
Yeah.
and it there's out of the out of that pain comes the love of the universe. Has the ability to transmute that pain into something really extraordinary, because it allows us to understand more of who we are from, how to say this, contrast is a beautiful thing. That we come from a place that is it's all love. And to understand the depth and complexity of that extraordinary love can only happen through contrast. And the gift that she was willing to give me, that Nolan was willing to give me, is an extraordinary one, which I can only see 40 years later. It wasn't like that at the beginning, believe me. It was.
I'm sure it wasn't. But you're helping so many people by telling this story because the number one most popular video on my channel is the one I did about the signs from my passed away loved ones. People often go through a dark night of the soul. They begin to awaken spiritually when they've experienced a significant loss. And I think part of the reason that I want people to talk about their near death experiences because it's that confirmation that we don't die, that love doesn't die, that our loved ones never leave us. They always love us. And you, especially you, a shared death experience, what a gift. And then also to have found a way through these binaural beats to reconnect again and again whenever you want. This is what people are looking for. This is what people need.
So, do we have time for me to tell us the story of my YouTube channel and the second
A
most
million percent yes.
Okay, here we go. So, on my YouTube channel, my number one viewed is about Bruce Grayson. He's like the researcher in this field. And it's a terrific interview. And it's all head stuff. This is what happens. Happens as a result. Great interview. My second one is from my office mate. So for 20 years, I mentored small business owners for the state of Minnesota. And my office mate is a guy by the name of Rich Bauman. And Rich grew up as a dairy farmer. And he had the same job I did. I worked with small businesses. He worked with dairy farms and helped them get to be better producers of milk. Anyway, so he's kind of a salt of the earth, southern Minnesota kind of guy. He's visiting us here in Virginia about a year ago. And as we're having a glass of wine before dinner, he says, Scott, I got to tell you something that happens to me, and you're the only one I can talk to. Okay. What? His wife had died very suddenly. She was never a sick day in her life. They went to bed. He woke up the next morning and she was gone. And they had dated since high school and 52 years. I mean, they were devoted to each other and it completely destroyed him. The loss was so sudden and so deep. He just was empty and didn't know what to do and was profoundly grieving. About 6 months after she had her transition, Rich got up in the middle of the night to hit the restroom, and he's walking down the hall, and there stands Barb in the hallway. And it's not a ghostly Barb. This is corporeal. And she's dressed in his favorite red sweater. And Rich, forgetting where he was, said, Barb, I just had this terrible dream that you had died and had left me. And Barb says to him, Rich, I did die. And they let me come down here to tell you that I'm doing fine and that you're going to do just fine. And at that point, she had closed the distance between them. She had hugged him, and it's a real hug. I mean, he can feel her arms around him, and he could smell her and kiss her on the cheek, and she just evaporated in his arms. And it I had never had a story quite like that told to me. I never, the whole come back as corporeal thing. I mean, maybe I'd read about it, but I mean, I know Rich. He's like incapable of making up that story. And what it did for me was it moved the boundaries about what is possible. Who
Mhm.
are we? What are we capable of? And as I read his transcript later, I sit there and said, Barb said, they let me come down here to tell you that I'm okay and that you're going to be okay. Who is they? Rich just looked at me and he goes, Scott, I wasn't paying attention to that. I'm not going to ask her that. She's right there. I had her back. So,
Wow. Oh, I'm so glad you shared that. And it's the perfect transition because people are going to watch this and they're going to want to contact you. So you've got a YouTube channel, put that in
yeah,
the show notes. You've also written books, multiple books.
I have 6 audio CDs, albums now, because CDs is an old technology, to help people use binaural beats and explore those states of awareness. And they're terrific. They're just wonderful. And I also teach classes on how to meditate and get into those same places that near death experiencers go to and shared death experiencers go to. All of that's on my website, neardeathmeditations.com. And
Beautiful.
I can just look at it, all that stuff that's the easiest place to go.
Okay. Excellent. Scott, I feel like the time went so fast. I probably still have so many more questions I could ask you. I just want to say to you that I am so grateful for this for you sharing your experiences. I know it takes a lot to be vulnerable and share these. I'm grateful for the research that you've done. And thank you for everything you're doing to help wake up the collective consciousness. It is so greatly needed right now.
Well, thank you, Lori. I think we had a good time. This is
We had a great time.
so. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us till the end.
Yep. Thank you for
Yeah.
watching. Next up, check out this playlist of other NDE interviews. Please like and subscribe. It really helps this channel to grow so I can bring you more content. Thank you for watching. I'm so glad you're here.